The sound of a western meadowlark's song cut through the morning air like liquid gold, and Delilah Barrett froze mid-step, her hand instinctively rising to shade her eyes as she scanned the scrubby mesquite trees dotting the Arizona landscape just outside Tombstone in the summer of 1882. Owen O'Reilly watched the young woman from where he sat astride his buckskin mare, curious about what had captured her attention so completely that she seemed to have forgotten the world around her, including the fact that she was standing in the middle of the dusty road leading into town. He had been riding hard for 3 days, his muscles aching and his throat parched, thinking only of reaching Tombstone and the cattle ranch where he had been hired as foreman. But something about the way this woman stood perfectly still, her head tilted at an angle of pure concentration, made him forget his own exhaustion. "Miss, you might want to step aside," he called out, his voice rougher than he intended from days of breathing dust and calling out to his small herd. "Got cattle coming through in about 2 minutes." She turned then, and Owen found himself looking into the most unusual eyes he had ever seen, a deep amber color that reminded him of honey held up to sunlight. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though several strands had escaped to frame a face that was pretty in an understated way, all sharp intelligence and sun-kissed skin. She wore a simple calico dress the color of faded sage, and her boots were scuffed and practical, the kind a woman wore when she actually walked places instead of just looking decorative. "Canyon Tohi, 2 o'clock in that creosote bush," she said, pointing without looking away from him. "And there is a cactus wren about 30 yards to the left. See how the call is different? Sharper, more insistent." Owen blinked, completely unprepared for this response. He had expected an apology, maybe a blush, certainly a hasty retreat to the boardwalk. Instead, this woman was giving him a lecture on birds while his cattle were literally about to stampede past her position. He could already hear the lowing and the thunder of hooves growing louder. "That is real interesting, miss, but you need to move. Now." He swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud, and he covered the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand closed around her elbow, firm but not rough, and he guided her toward the side of the road with more urgency than gallantry. She allowed herself to be moved, but she kept talking. Most people cannot tell the difference between a towhee and a wren, but once you know what to listen for, it is as clear as distinguishing between a fiddle and a guitar. The towhee has this particular trill at the end, see? The cattle thundered past, 20 head of rangy longhorns that Owen had been driving north from the Mexican border, and dust rose in thick clouds that made them both cough. Owen kept his hand on her arm, positioning himself between her and the cattle, even though they were well clear of danger now. Old habits died hard, and his father had raised him to protect women, even unusual ones who stood in the middle of roads discussing bird calls while livestock bore down on them. When the dust settled, and the last of the cattle had passed, being expertly guided by Owen's 2 hired hands toward the holding pens at the edge of town, the woman finally seemed to notice that she was standing quite close to a strange man, his hand still resting on her arm. She stepped back, but there was no fear in her eyes, only a frank assessment that Owen found both unnerving and refreshing. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was calmer now, more measured. "I suppose I was not paying attention to the road." "No, you were listening to birds." Owen could not keep the note of bewilderment out of his voice. In the middle of a road, with cattle coming. "The birds do not care about cattle," she pointed out, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in her tone. "They sing regardless of what humans and their animals are doing. Most people just do not listen." Owen found himself smiling despite his exhaustion and the fact that he still needed to get his mare settled and report to the ranch. "And you do? Listen, I mean. Always." She tilted her head again, that same gesture of absolute focus he had noticed before. "There is a Gamble's quail family in the wash behind the assayer's office. 7 chicks, maybe 8. The male does this particular call when he is leading them to water in the evening, and there is a roadrunner that hunts along the back of the livery stable every morning just after dawn. I have been tracking a family of curve-billed thrashers that nested in the saguaro behind the boarding house where I live." Owen realized he was staring, but he could not help it. He had been around plenty of women in his 26 years, had even been engaged once before the girl decided she preferred a banker to a cowboy, but he had never met anyone quite like this. She spoke about birds the way other people spoke about treasure or love, with a passion that was almost tangible. "I am Owen O'Reilly," he said, suddenly aware that they were standing in the middle of the street having an extended conversation without having been properly introduced. "Just hired on as foreman at the Triple Bar Ranch. Delilah Barrett," she replied, and she extended her hand for a shake like a man would, direct and confident. Her grip was firm, her palms slightly rough from work. "I teach at the schoolhouse here in Tombstone. Well, I teach during the school year. Summers, I help my aunt with her seamstress business." Owen held her hand perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing it. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Barrett, even if the circumstances were a bit unusual." "Most of my circumstances are unusual, Mr. O'Reilly," Delilah said, and this time there was definitely amusement in her voice. "You will find that out quickly enough if you plan to stay in Tombstone for any length of time. It is not a large town." Before Owen could respond, a woman's voice called out from the boardwalk. "Delilah, stop bothering that poor man and get yourself over here. We have 3 dresses to finish before Saturday." Delilah turned and waved at a stout woman in her 50s who was standing in the doorway of a shop with a sign that read Barrett Sisters Dressmaking and Alterations. The resemblance was strong enough that Owen guessed this was the aunt Delilah had mentioned. "I should go," Delilah said, but she seemed reluctant, which pleased Owen more than it probably should have. "Welcome to Tombstone, Mr. O'Reilly. I hope you will be happy at the Triple Bar." "I hope so too," Owen said, and he meant it, though he was realizing that his reasons for wanting to stay in Tombstone had just expanded beyond simple employment. He watched her walk away, noting the straight set of her shoulders and the way she paused once to look up at a bird circling overhead, following its flight with that same intense focus she brought to everything. A black-throated sparrow, if Owen had to guess, though he honestly had no idea and felt suddenly, inexplicably interested in learning. The next few days were consumed with settling into his new position at the Triple Bar Ranch. The owner, a gruff man named Jacob Thornton, who had made his fortune in silver before turning to cattle, had hired Owen based on a recommendation from a mutual acquaintance in Texas. The work was hard but familiar, the kind of labor Owen had been doing since he was tall enough to sit a horse properly, and he fell into the rhythm of it with the ease of long practice. He rose before dawn, worked until his muscles ached, fell into his bunk in the foreman's cabin exhausted, and then did it all again the next day. But he found himself listening in a way he never had before. When he rode out to check the fence lines in the northern pasture, he heard the calls of birds he could not name, sharp trills and melodic whistles and harsh caws that formed a symphony he had somehow never noticed before. When he stopped to water his horse at the creek that ran through the eastern section of the property, he heard what might have been the song of that meadowlark Delilah had pointed out, and he paused longer than necessary, trying to fix the sound in his memory. It was foolish, he told himself. He was a cattleman, not an ornithologist. What did it matter if he could tell one bird from another? But he could not shake the memory of Delilah Barrett standing in the road, her whole being focused on something most people ignored completely, finding beauty and meaning in something as simple as a bird's call. There had been such joy in her voice when she spoke about the towhee and the wren, such absolute certainty that what she was doing mattered. Owen had spent most of his adult life focused on practical concerns, on the concrete realities of livestock and wages, and the brutal work of surviving in a harsh landscape. He was good at his job, respected by the men who worked under him, known for his fairness and his skill with difficult horses. But listening to Delilah talk about birds, he had felt something stir in him that he had not even known was asleep, a hunger for something beyond the daily grind of existence. Sunday came, and Owen found himself riding into Tombstone for church services, something he had not done regularly in years. He told himself it was important to be seen in town, to establish himself as a respectable member of the community now that he had a good position. He did not examine too closely the fact that he had taken extra care with his appearance, shaving carefully and wearing his best shirt, the blue one that his sister had given him 3 Christmases ago. The church was a simple wooden structure, whitewashed and neat, with a bell tower that rose above the dusty streets like a declaration of faith in the midst of chaos. Tombstone was a wild town, famous for its silver mines and its violence, but it was also a place where people tried to build normal lives, to create civilization in the wilderness. Owen tied his horse to the rail outside and joined the stream of people entering the church. Miners and merchants and ranch families, all dressed in their Sunday best. He spotted Delilah immediately, sitting in a pew near the front with her aunt and an older woman who shared their strong features, probably another aunt or perhaps her mother. Delilah wore a dress of soft blue cotton, more elaborate than the simple calico she had worn in the street, with small buttons down the front and lace at the collar. Her hair was still pulled back, but it was arranged more carefully, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Owen made his way to a pew several rows back, nodding to the few people he recognized from his brief time in town. The service began with a hymn, and Owen found himself watching Delilah rather than the hymnal he shared with an elderly rancher. She sang clearly and unselfconsciously, her voice blending with the others in a way that reminded him of bird song, multiple melodies creating something greater than any single voice could achieve alone. After the service, people milled around outside the church, exchanging news and gossip and making plans for the week ahead. Owen was talking with Jacob Thornton about a problem with the windmill in the south pasture when Delilah appeared at his elbow, as sudden and unexpected as she had been in the road that first day. "Mr. O'Reilly," she said, and her amber eyes were bright with something that might have been mischief. "I was hoping I might see you in town. I wanted to apologize for the other day." "Apologize?" Owen was genuinely confused. "What for?" "For nearly getting myself trampled by your cattle. It was foolish of me to stand in the road like that. My aunt gave me quite a lecture about paying attention to my surroundings." Owen found himself grinning. "Well, I appreciate the apology, though it is not necessary. No harm done. And I learned something about birds, which I figure makes us about even." "Did you really?" Delilah looked delighted by this, as though he had given her a precious gift. "Learned something, I mean." "I have been trying to identify bird calls all week," Owen admitted, feeling slightly foolish but also pleased by her obvious enthusiasm. "Not having much success, to be honest. Turns out knowing you should listen and knowing what you are listening to are 2 different things." Delilah's face lit up in a way that made Owen's chest feel tight. "I could teach you if you like, if you are interested. I know most men do not care much about such things." "I would like that," Owen said, and he was surprised by how much he meant it. "I would like that very much." Jacob Thornton had wandered off to talk to someone else, which left Owen and Delilah standing together in a small bubble of privacy, despite the crowd around them. Delilah's aunt was watching them from across the churchyard, her expression assessing but not disapproving. "Are you free next Saturday afternoon?" Delilah asked. "I could take you to some of my favorite spots around Tombstone, places where the birds gather. It is cooler in the evening, better for walking, and that is when many species are most active." "Saturday afternoon," Owen repeated, mentally reviewing his work schedule and deciding that whatever needed to be done could be rearranged. "Yes, I can make that work. Should I meet you somewhere?" "The schoolhouse," Delilah said promptly. "Do you know where it is?" "Small building on the east side of town, painted yellow. I will bring some sketches I have made. It helps to see what the birds look like while you are learning their calls." They made their arrangements, and Owen rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe years. He caught himself whistling as he worked that weak, old songs his mother used to sing, and the men noticed but were wise enough not to comment. By the time Saturday arrived, Owen was as nervous as a schoolboy, checking his appearance multiple times and changing his shirt twice before settling on the same blue one he had worn to church. Delilah was waiting for him outside the schoolhouse when he arrived, and she had a leather satchel slung over her shoulder and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. She also had a canteen and a small package wrapped in cloth that she explained was bread and cheese, in case they got hungry during their walk. "I thought we would start with the wash just north of town," she said as they set off, walking side by side along a well-worn path. "The water attracts a lot of different species, and this time of year you can usually count on seeing at least a dozen varieties if you are patient." The wash was a dry riverbed that only flowed during the monsoon season. But there were cottonwood trees growing along its banks, their roots reaching deep to find underground water, and the shade they provided created a small oasis in the harsh desert landscape. Delilah led Owen to a spot where several flat rocks offered a comfortable place to sit, and they settled down with the quiet care of people who knew sudden movements would scare away wildlife. For several minutes, they simply sat in silence, and Owen found himself becoming aware of sounds he would normally have dismissed as background noise. There was the rustle of leaves in the slight breeze, the distant call of a raven, and then, closer, a quick chittering sound that seemed to come from the underbrush near the water. "Chrysal thrasher," Delilah whispered, pointing to a bird that emerged from the bushes, its plumage a subtle mix of gray and brown with a distinctive curved bill. "Listen to how it calls. It is different from the curve-billed thrasher I mentioned before, more melodic with a wider range of notes." Owen watched and listened, and gradually he began to understand what Delilah meant. The bird's song was complex, a series of phrases that seemed almost conversational, as though it were telling a story to any creature willing to listen. When the thrasher flew away, disappearing into the cottonwoods, Delilah pulled out her sketches and showed Owen detailed drawings of various birds, each one labeled with notes about habitat, behavior, and distinctive features. "These are remarkable," Owen said, studying a drawing of a vermilion flycatcher, the male's brilliant red plumage captured in careful detail. "Did you do all of these yourself?" "Over the years," Delilah confirmed, a faint blush coloring her cheeks at the compliment. "I have been watching birds since I was a child. My father used to take me on long walks, and he would point out different species, tell me their names. He died when I was 12, and I suppose I kept doing it as a way to feel close to him. There was a sadness in her voice that made Owen want to reach out and take her hand, but he restrained himself, sensing that she was sharing something important and not wanting to interrupt the moment with an unwanted gesture. "He sounds like he was a good father," Owen said quietly. "The best," Delilah agreed. "He believed that education was important for everyone, not just boys. He is the reason I became a teacher. He always said that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from you, and that the natural world had lessons to teach if we were willing to learn them." They sat together as the afternoon lengthened into evening, and Delilah pointed out bird after bird, teaching Owen not just their names but their behaviors, their relationships to the landscape, the way they fit into the complex web of desert life. He learned about the Gila woodpecker that nested in saguaro cacti, creating holes that would later be used by other birds. He learned about the phainopla, a sleek black bird that fed on mistletoe berries and helped spread the parasitic plant to new trees. He learned that the harsh desert was actually teeming with life if you knew how to look and listen. But more than the facts about birds, Owen found himself learning about Delilah. He learned that she had come to Tombstone 3 years ago to live with her aunts after her mother remarried a man Delilah did not get along with. He learned that she loved teaching, but found it frustrating that most of the boys left school as soon as they were old enough to work in the mines. He learned that she had a younger brother in California who wanted to be a doctor, and that she sent him half her wages each month to help pay for his education. "What about you?" Delilah asked as they shared the bread and cheese she had brought, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood while the birds sang around them. "What brought you to Tombstone? You do not sound like you are from Arizona." "Texas originally," Owen confirmed. "Born and raised on a ranch outside San Antonio. My father ran cattle until the drought of '76 wiped him out, lost almost everything. He sold what was left and moved the family to Missouri, bought a small farm there. I stayed in the cattle business, worked my way up from ranch hand to foreman over the past 10 years. You miss Texas?" Delilah asked. Owen considered the question carefully. "I miss what it was before the drought. Wide open spaces, good grass, water that flowed year-round. But that Texas does not exist anymore, at least not the way I remember it. So I keep moving, looking for places where the work is good and the land still has something to offer." "That sounds lonely," Delilah observed, and there was compassion in her voice, not pity. "It can be," Owen admitted, "but it has its compensations. I have seen a lot of country, met a lot of different people. And I like the work, like being responsible for something, making decisions that matter. Do you ever think about settling down permanently, having a place of your own?" "Sometimes," Owen said, and he found himself looking at Delilah as he said it, noting the way the fading sunlight caught in her hair, turning it bronze. "I have been saving my wages, thinking maybe someday I will have enough to buy a small spread somewhere, run my own cattle. But it takes time to build up that kind of stake." They talked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep red, and the birds settled into their evening routines, their calls changing from the bright songs of afternoon to the softer sounds of twilight. When it was finally too dark to see clearly, they gathered up Delilah's things and walked back toward town, and Owen found himself deliberately slowing his pace, not wanting the evening to end. "Thank you for this," he said when they reached the schoolhouse. "I have lived around birds my whole life and never really saw them until today. Or heard them, I suppose." "Thank you for wanting to learn," Delilah replied. "Most people think I am strange for caring so much about such things. It is nice to share it with someone who actually listens." Owen wanted to tell her that he would listen to her talk about anything, that he found her passion fascinating and her knowledge impressive, that spending the afternoon with her had been the best few hours he had experienced in longer than he could remember. But he was not good with words, never had been, so instead he just said, "I would like to do this again if you are willing. I feel like I have about 100 more birds to learn." "Hundreds more," Delilah corrected with a smile. "Arizona has an incredible diversity of bird species. We have barely scratched the surface." They made plans to meet again the following Saturday, and then the Saturday after that, and soon it became a regular pattern. Owen would finish his work at the ranch, ride into town, and meet Delilah for an afternoon of walking and listening and learning. They explored the hills around Tombstone, the washes and canyons and hidden springs where birds gathered. They visited the San Pedro River, where migrating species stopped to rest and feed. They spent a memorable day in the Dragoon Mountains, climbing higher into terrain where different birds lived, species adapted to cooler temperatures and different vegetation. With each outing, Owen's ability to identify birds improved. He learned to distinguish between similar species by subtle differences in their calls, to anticipate where certain birds might be found based on the habitat and time of day. But more importantly, he found himself seeing the world differently, paying attention to details he had always overlooked before. The natural world, which he had always viewed primarily in terms of its utility for cattle ranching, revealed itself to be endlessly complex and beautiful, full of small dramas and intricate relationships. And with each outing, he also fell more deeply for Delilah Barrett. It was not a sudden, overwhelming passion, but rather a gradual accumulation of moments, each one building on the last. The way she laughed when a roadrunner raced past them, its crest raised and its legs a blur. The way she patiently explained the same concept multiple times, when he could not quite grasp the difference between two similar calls. The way she trusted him enough to share her favorite places, spots she had discovered during solitary walks, private sanctuaries, where she went when the demands of teaching and sewing became too much. Owen had been in love before, or thought he had, but this felt different. With Sarah, his former fiancée, love had been something he fell into because it seemed like the natural next step, because she was pretty and came from a good family and seemed to expect his courtship. But with Delilah, love felt like a choice he made every day, a conscious decision to show up and listen and learn, to open himself to someone who saw the world in a completely different way than he did. It was late September when Owen finally worked up the courage to acknowledge what was happening between them. They were sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking a small canyon, watching a pair of red-tailed hawks circle overhead in a courtship dance, when he reached over and took her hand. Delilah did not pull away, instead lacing her fingers through his and squeezing gently. "Delilah," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how to say it properly, so I am just going to be direct." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes serious. "All right. These past few months spending time with you, learning about birds and just talking, it has meant more to me than I know how to express. You have changed the way I see everything, made me pay attention to things I never noticed before. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about this as just learning about birds and started thinking about it as courting you. If I have been presumptuous, if you do not feel the same way, I apologize. But I needed you to know." For a long moment, Delilah did not respond, and Owen felt his heart sink, certain he had misread the situation, that her friendliness had been nothing more than enthusiasm for sharing her knowledge. But then she smiled, a slow, radiant expression that transformed her entire face. "Owen O'Reilly, you are possibly the most observant man I have ever met when it comes to birds, but completely oblivious when it comes to reading human behavior. I have been hoping you would say something like this for weeks now." Relief and joy flooded through Owen in equal measure. "You have?" "Yes, you foolish man," Delilah said, laughing now. "Why do you think I kept finding reasons for us to spend time together? I could have taught you the basics of bird identification in 3 or 4 outings. The rest has been pure excuse to be with you." Owen felt like he should probably say something romantic, something worthy of the moment, but instead he just laughed too, the sound echoing off the canyon walls and startling the hawks, which wheeled away with harsh cries of annoyance. And then, because words seemed inadequate, he leaned over and kissed her, gentle and tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull back if she wanted to. She did not pull back. Instead, she kissed him in return, one hand coming up to rest against his cheek. And Owen thought that no bird's song, however beautiful, could compare to the feeling of holding Delilah Barrett in his arms while the Arizona sun painted the world gold around them. After that day, their relationship changed in subtle but significant ways. They still went on their bird-watching expeditions, but now they walked hand in hand, and their conversations ranged beyond ornithology to include their hopes and dreams, their fears and disappointments, all the things that people share when they are building something that might last. Owen met Delilah's aunts formally, sitting in their parlor and drinking tea while they questioned him about his prospects and his intentions, and he must have passed their inspection, because afterward they smiled at him warmly whenever he came to call. Delilah met Jacob Thornton when Owen brought her out to the Triple Bar one Sunday afternoon, and the old rancher took an immediate liking to her, especially when she identified a western kingbird that had been terrorizing his chickens and suggested a humane way to discourage the bird from hunting so close to the coop. She also charmed the ranch hands by teaching them the difference between a raven and a crow, a distinction that had apparently been the subject of a long-running debate in the bunkhouse. As autumn deepened and the temperatures began to cool, making the desert more hospitable, Owen and Delilah spent more time together. They attended church socials and town dances, and Owen discovered that Delilah was a surprisingly good dancer, light on her feet and willing to laugh when he occasionally stepped on her toes. They went on picnics in the hills, and Owen learned to pack the kind of food Delilah liked, simple fare that could be eaten with fingers while they watched birds and talked about everything under the sun. It was on one of these picnics, in late October when the cottonwoods along the wash had turned gold and the air had a crisp edge to it, that Owen asked Delilah to marry him. He had been planning something elaborate, had even ridden to Tucson to buy a ring, but in the moment, watching her laugh at the antics of a roadrunner chasing a lizard, he simply could not wait any longer. "Delilah Barrett, will you marry me?" he asked, the words tumbling out without preamble or preparation. Delilah turned to stare at him, her eyes wide. "What?" Owen pulled the ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone that reminded him of the color of a vermilion flycatcher. "I know I should probably do this more formally, ask your aunt's permission first, make a proper speech. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life listening to you talk about birds and learning to see the world the way you do. So, will you marry me?" For a heart-stopping moment, Delilah said nothing, and Owen wondered if he had moved too fast, if 3 months of courtship was not enough time. But then she was nodding, tears streaming down her face, and saying yes, yes, of course yes. and Owen was slipping the ring onto her finger and kissing her while the roadrunner watched them with beady-eyed interest from a nearby rock. They were married in January of 1883, in the same whitewashed church where Owen had first seen Delilah after coming to Tombstone. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Delilah's aunts and her brother who traveled from California, and by Jacob Thornton, and a number of the ranch hands who had become Owen's friends. Delilah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that her aunts had made, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers because fresh ones were hard to come by in January. Owen wore his best suit, newly purchased for the occasion, and he felt awkward and stiff in the formal clothes until he saw Delilah walking toward him down the aisle, her face radiant with happiness, and then nothing else mattered. They exchanged vows in front of the congregation, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and when the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed his bride while the church bells rang out overhead. Jacob Thornton had given them a generous wedding gift, a small house on the edge of the Triple Bar property that had been built for a previous foreman and had stood empty for several years. It needed work, but it was sound and had good bones, and Owen and Delilah spent the first months of their marriage fixing it up, making it a home. They painted the walls, repaired the roof, built new shelves in the kitchen, and planted a small garden that Delilah promised would attract hummingbirds in the summer. Delilah continued teaching through the spring semester, riding into Tombstone 3 days a week while Owen worked the ranch, and in the evenings they would sit on their small porch and listen to the birds settling down for the night, identifying each call together. Owen had become quite proficient now, could distinguish between a dozen different species just by sound, and he took a quiet pride in his ability to sometimes spot a bird before Delilah did, though she still knew far more than he ever would. "I never thought I would be this happy," Delilah said one evening in late April, leaning against Owen's shoulder as they watched the sun set over the distant mountains. "When I came to Tombstone, I felt so lost, so angry about having to leave California, but now I cannot imagine being anywhere else." "I know what you mean," Owen agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "I spent years drifting from place to place, always thinking the next ranch would be better, the next town more interesting. But this is home now. You are home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Delilah spoke again, her voice tentative in a way that was unusual for her. "Owen, I have something to tell you and I am not quite sure how you will react." Owen felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "I am with child," Delilah said simply. "About 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." Joy exploded through Owen, so intense it almost hurt. "Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly," Delilah confirmed, and she was smiling now, relieved by his reaction. "The baby should come in November, assuming everything goes well." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break, and he felt tears prick his eyes. "This is the best news I have ever received, the very best." "I was hoping you would say that," Delilah said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I have to stop teaching, of course. It would not be appropriate to continue once I start showing. But I thought maybe I could do some tutoring from home, help some of the children who are falling behind in their reading." "Whatever you want," Owen said. "We will make it work." The months of Delilah's pregnancy were both wonderful and worrying for Owen. He found himself constantly concerned about her health, about whether she was getting enough rest, eating enough, not overexerting herself. Delilah bore his fussing with good-natured patience, assuring him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly capable of managing. She did slow down, though, spending more time at home and less time on the long walks they had taken before. But she still listened to the birds, still pointed out calls and songs to Owen, and he brought her feathers he found while working, small treasures that she identified and added to a collection she was building for the baby. "Our child will grow up knowing the names of birds," she said one day, arranging the feathers in a wooden box Owen had made. "That is important to me, that we pass this knowledge on." "We will teach our child everything you have taught me," Owen promised. "How to listen, how to pay attention, how to find beauty in small things." The baby arrived on a cold November night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Owen rode for the doctor in Tombstone, pushing his horse harder than he ever had, and then paced outside the bedroom while Delilah's aunts and the doctor worked. The sounds coming from the room terrified him. Delilah's cries of pain, the urgent voices of the women helping her, and he prayed harder than he had since he was a child, bargaining with God to keep his wife and child safe. When the baby's first cry split the air, thin and outraged, Owen felt his knees go weak with relief. One of the aunts emerged a few minutes later, her face tired but smiling, and told him he had a son, healthy and strong with a good pair of lungs on him. Owen entered the bedroom to find Delilah propped up against pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes nearly undid him. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we might name him Daniel, after my father." "Daniel Barrett O'Reilly. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, marveling at the tiny features, the miniature hands that waved randomly in the air. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are lucky," Delilah corrected. "All 3 of us." Raising a baby while working a ranch was harder than Owen had anticipated, but they managed through a combination of help from Delilah's aunts, flexibility from Jacob Thornton, and sheer determination. Daniel grew quickly, a happy baby who seemed fascinated by everything around him, and Owen found himself enchanted by fatherhood in a way he had not expected. He loved watching Daniel discover the world, seeing things through his son's eyes, teaching him simple things like how to stack blocks and later how to walk, holding the boy's chubby hands as he took wobbly steps across the floor. When Daniel was old enough to be carried in a sling, Delilah began taking him on short walks around the property, and she would point out birds to him, naming them in the same patient way she had once taught Owen. "That is a mourning dove, Daniel. Hear how it calls." Soft and sad, like it is telling a story. Owen watched these interactions with a fullness in his chest that he sometimes thought might burst. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it, these moments of simple domestic happiness, this feeling of belonging to something larger than himself. When Daniel was 2 years old, Jacob Thornton called Owen into his office and made him an unexpected offer. The old rancher was thinking about retirement, wanted to spend more time with his daughter in California, and he proposed selling the triple bar to Owen at a price well below market value, with generous terms that would allow Owen to pay it off over 20 years. "You have earned this," Jacob said bluntly. "You have run this ranch better than I ever did, increased the herd, improved the water systems, kept the men happy and productive. I cannot think of anyone I would rather see own this place." Owen was overwhelmed by the offer, but also terrified by the magnitude of it. Owning a ranch meant debt, risk, responsibility on a scale he had never shouldered before. He told Jacob he needed to talk to his wife, and he rode home with his mind spinning. Delilah listened to his explanation of Jacob's offer, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, She asked practical questions about the finances, the terms of the sale, the current state of the cattle market. Owen answered as best he could, laying out both the opportunities and the risks. "What do you want to do?" Delilah asked finally. "I want to say yes," Owen admitted. "I want to build something permanent, something we can pass on to Daniel and any other children we might have. But I am scared, Delilah. What if I fail? What if there is a drought or a market crash and I lose everything? I would be risking not just my future, but yours and Daniel's too." Delilah took his hand, her grip firm and steady. "Life is always a risk, Owen. We could play it safe, keep doing what we are doing, and something terrible could still happen. Or we could take this chance, work together to build something meaningful and maybe create something wonderful. I believe in you. I believe in us. So if you want to do this, then I am with you completely." Owen accepted Jacob's offer the next day, and they spent the following months working through the legal and financial details of the sale. By the summer of 1886, Owen O'Reilly was the official owner of the Triple Bar Ranch, a fact that still sometimes seemed unreal when he thought about it. He was 29 years old, the owner of 5,000 acres of rangeland, a house, outbuildings, and a herd of 600 head of cattle. It was more than he had ever dreamed of achieving, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. But he had Delilah beside him, helping with the account books, managing the household, offering advice when he asked for it and support when he did not know he needed it. And he had Daniel, growing taller and more curious every day, learning to ride a gentle old mare, helping collect eggs from the chickens, following Owen around and imitating everything his father did. The ranch prospered under Owen's ownership. He made smart decisions about breeding, about which cattle to sell and which to keep, about when to invest in improvements, and when to conserve resources. The work was endless, sunrise to well past sunset most days, but it was satisfying in a way Owen had never experienced when working for someone else. Every fence he mended, every calf that survived to maturity, every dollar of profit added to the ranch's value was an investment in his family's future. Delilah gave birth to their second child in the spring of 1888, a daughter they named Sarah after Owen's mother. She was a quieter baby than Daniel had been, more observant, and she seemed content to sit and watch the world around her for long periods. Delilah resumed her practice of taking the children on walks as soon as Sarah was old enough, and Owen would sometimes join them in the evenings, the whole family walking together through the desert while Delilah pointed out birds and Owen carried Sarah on his shoulders. Daniel, now 5 years old, had inherited his mother's passion for birds. He could identify a dozen species by sight and several more by sound, and he took pride in showing off his knowledge to anyone who would listen. Owen watched his son's enthusiasm with a mixture of amusement and deep satisfaction, pleased that something so important to Delilah was being passed on to the next generation. "That is a lesser goldfinch," Daniel announced one evening, pointing at a small yellow bird perched on a mesquite branch. "The male is brighter than the female, and they like to eat seeds, especially from sunflowers." "Very good," Delilah praised, ruffling his hair affectionately. "What do you hear?" Daniel cocked his head, listening intently in a gesture so like his mother that Owen had to smile. "The call sounds like tee-yee, tee-yee, and when they fly, their wings make a little sound, kind of fluttery." "Excellent," Delilah said. "You have been paying attention." They continued their walk, and Owen found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that day 6 years ago, when he had ridden into Tombstone thinking only of his new job as foreman. He had been focused entirely on practical concerns then, on wages and working conditions, and the quality of the cattle he would be managing. He had never imagined that a chance encounter with a woman standing in the middle of the road, listening to birds, would transform everything. Delilah had taught him to listen, really listen, to the world around him. She had opened his eyes to beauty he had been blind to, shown him that there was more to life than simple survival and material success. She had given him a family, a home, a sense of purpose that went beyond the daily grind of ranch work. And in the process, she had made him a better man, more patient, more observant, more willing to find joy in small moments. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, noticing his silence. "How lucky I am," Owen said honestly. "How grateful." She smiled and took his hand, and they walked on together as the sun set behind the mountains and the evening birds began their songs, a symphony that Owen now knew by heart. The years passed with the kind of swift inevitability that characterizes happy times. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Owen to hire more help and slowly pay down the debt he owed for purchasing it. Daniel and Sarah grew, their personalities becoming more defined with each passing year. Daniel remained passionate about birds and nature, but he also showed an aptitude for mathematics and a love of reading that delighted Delilah. Sarah was quieter but equally bright, with a particular talent for drawing that manifested when she was barely 4 years old, producing sketches of animals and plants with surprising accuracy. Delilah resumed teaching part-time when Sarah was old enough for school, taking on a reduced schedule that allowed her to be home in the afternoons. She also began compiling her bird sketches and notes into a comprehensive guide to the birds of southern Arizona, a project that consumed many of her evenings and that Owen supported enthusiastically, building her a desk by the window where the light was best for detailed work. In the summer of 1892, when Daniel was 9 and Sarah was 4, Delilah gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. He was a robust baby with Owen's dark hair and Delilah's amber eyes, and he completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right to both parents. The ranch now employed 8 men full-time and several more seasonally, making it one of the larger operations in the region. Owen had built a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle, and he found himself taking on a leadership role in the local Ranchers Association, helping to organize drives and negotiate with the railroad about shipping rates. But despite his increasing responsibilities, Owen made sure to set aside time for his family. Sunday afternoons were sacred, reserved for walks with Delilah and the children, for bird watching and exploring and simply being together. He taught Daniel and Sarah to ride, showing them the same patience that Delilah had shown him when teaching him about birds. He read to them in the evenings, adventure stories and fairy tales, and later he helped Daniel with his arithmetic homework and admired Sarah's latest drawings. Delilah's Bird Guide was published in 1894 by a small press in Tucson, and though it was not a commercial success, it was praised by the few ornithologists who saw it for its accuracy and detail. Delilah was proud of the accomplishment, and Owen threw a small party to celebrate, inviting friends and neighbors and displaying the book prominently in their parlor. "I never thought I would be married to an author," he teased gently, watching Delilah's cheeks flush with pleasure at the attention. "It is just a small book," she protested. "Nothing important." "It is important to you, so it is important to me," Owen corrected. "And it is important to Daniel and Sarah and Thomas, because they will always have this record of their mother's knowledge and passion. That matters more than you know." As the children grew older, the family dynamic shifted in subtle ways. Daniel, approaching his teenage years, began spending more time helping with ranch work, learning the skills he would need to eventually take over the operation if he chose to. He was a natural horseman and had inherited Owen's calm, steady approach to working with animals, but he also retained his love of birds and would often pause in the middle of chores to identify a call or watch a particularly interesting species. Sarah developed into a talented artist, and Delilah encouraged this by ordering proper art supplies from San Francisco and setting up a small studio for her in one corner of the house. The girl's subjects were almost exclusively drawn from nature, birds and animals and desert landscapes, rendered with a skill that seemed to exceed her years. Thomas, the youngest, was still too small to show definitive interests, but he was an active, curious child who got into everything and kept both his parents and siblings on their toes. He adored his older brother and sister and followed them everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with their longer strides. In the spring of 1896, tragedy struck when Delilah's aunt, the one who had run the dressmaking shop, passed away after a brief illness. Delilah was devastated by the loss, and Owen watched helplessly as his usually strong wife struggled with her grief. The aunt had been like a second mother to her, had taken her in when she needed a home, had supported her when she decided to marry a cowboy instead of the banker, who had also been courting her. Owen did what he could, taking over more of the household responsibilities, giving Delilah space to mourn while also being there when she needed comfort. He brought her wildflowers he found while working, knowing she loved them. He sat with her in the evenings, holding her hand while she cried. And he took her on long walks, just the two of them, to the places where they had first gotten to know each other, the wash with the cottonwood trees, the canyon with the red-tailed hawks. "I keep thinking about all the things I never said to her," Delilah said one evening as they watched the sunset from their familiar spot on the rocks. "All the times I meant to visit and did not, all the ways I took her for granted." "She knew you loved her," Owen said gently. "I saw the way she looked at you, the pride in her eyes. She knew." "I hope so," Delilah whispered. "I truly hope so." Gradually, Delilah's grief softened into something more manageable, a sadness that she carried but that no longer consumed her. She threw herself back into teaching and into her work on a second bird guide. This one focused specifically on the songs and calls of desert birds, with musical notation to help readers understand the complex patterns. Owen supported this project as he had the first, understanding that it was Delilah's way of processing her grief, of creating something meaningful from her pain. The turn of the century found the O'Reilly family well established and prosperous. Owen had paid off more than half the debt on the ranch and had expanded the herd to over 1,000 head. The house had been enlarged and improved, with an addition that included a proper study for Delilah and separate bedrooms for each of the children. They had weathered droughts and market downturns, disease outbreaks and difficult winters, and they had emerged stronger each time. Daniel, now 17, was preparing to attend the university in Tucson, planning to study natural sciences with an eye toward becoming a teacher like his mother. Sarah, at 12, was already selling her drawings to tourists in Tombstone, small pieces that captured the unique character of the desert. Thomas, 8 years old, had developed into a fearless rider and an enthusiastic helper around the ranch, though he also showed signs of inheriting his mother's sharp intellect. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen and Delilah took a rare overnight trip alone, leaving the children in the care of Delilah's surviving aunt and two of the most trusted ranch hands. They rode out to the cabin in the Dragoon Mountains where they had once spent a memorable day watching birds, and they camped under the stars, talking about everything and nothing, remembering their years together. "You ever regret marrying me?" Owen asked as they lay side by side, looking up at the immense sweep of the Milky Way. "I know you could have had a different life, maybe an easier one." "Never," Delilah said firmly. "Not for one single moment. You gave me a life full of love and purpose and beauty. You listened when I spoke about things others thought were silly. You valued what I valued, learned what I wanted to teach. How could I regret that?" "I am the one who should be grateful," Owen countered. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, doing my job, saving my money, but not really living. You taught me to pay attention, to find joy in the everyday, to understand that there is always something new to learn if you are willing to listen." They fell silent for a while, comfortable in each other's presence in the way that only comes from years of shared experience. Then Delilah spoke again, her voice soft but clear in the desert night. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day when you pulled me out of the way of your cattle? You said I was listening to birds instead of paying attention to the road." "I remember," Owen confirmed. "I thought you were the strangest woman I had ever met. And now—" "Now I know you are the strangest woman I have ever met," Owen said, and he could hear the smile in his own voice. "And the wisest, and the kindest, and the one I love more than anything else in this world." Delilah rolled over to face him, and even in the darkness he could see the gleam of tears on her cheeks. "You changed too, you know. That first day you were so focused on getting your cattle to town, so intent on your practical concerns. But you stopped. You listened to me talk about birds, even though you had every reason to just ride on. You were willing to see value in something that had no monetary worth, no practical application. That is when I knew you were different from other men I had met." They made love under the stars, tender and familiar, 20 years of intimacy informing every touch, and afterward they fell asleep in each other's arms, the night birds singing around them. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Daniel graduated from the university and took a position teaching science at a school in Phoenix, though he came home often to visit and help with the ranch during busy seasons. He married a young woman he met at university, a fellow teacher named Margaret, and they had 2 children of their own, making Owen and Delilah grandparents at ages that still felt impossibly young to them. Sarah's artistic talent flourished, and at 18 she was offered an apprenticeship with a well-known painter in Santa Fe. It was difficult for Delilah to let her daughter go, but Owen reminded her gently that they had always encouraged their children to pursue their passions, and they could not hold Sarah back now. The girl left for New Mexico with their blessing and a trunk full of supplies, and she wrote home weekly with enthusiastic descriptions of everything she was learning. Thomas, true to his early promise, proved to be a natural rancher. He loved the work, loved the land, loved the cattle and horses and the whole rhythm of ranch life. By the time he was 20, he was effectively running the day-to-day operations of the Triple Bar, allowing Owen to step back somewhat and spend more time on other pursuits. Delilah published her second bird guide in 1906, and this one was more successful than the first, becoming a standard reference work for bird enthusiasts throughout the Southwest. She received letters from fellow bird watchers, asking questions and sharing their own observations, and she corresponded with several prominent ornithologists, contributing to scientific discussions about migration patterns and species adaptation. Owen, now in his 50s, found himself with more leisure time than he had ever had as an adult, and he used it to pursue interests he had neglected during the busy years of building the ranch. He read extensively, took up photography, and became involved in local politics, serving several terms as a county commissioner. But his greatest pleasure remained the time he spent with Delilah, walking through the desert they both loved, listening to birds, talking about their children and grandchildren, and the shape of the life they had built together. "We did well, didn't we?" Delilah said one afternoon, as they walked a familiar path through the wash where Owen had first taken her on a bird-watching expedition nearly 30 years before. They were both grayer now, moving a bit more slowly, but the essential connection between them remained as strong as ever. "We did better than well," Owen said. "We built something real, something that will last beyond us. The ranch, the family, the knowledge you have shared about birds, that is a legacy worth leaving." Delilah smiled, that same radiant expression that had captured Owen's heart all those years ago. "I was thinking more about us, about how we have loved each other. That seems like the most important thing to me." "That too," Owen agreed, pulling her close. "Especially that." In 1910, the O'Reilly family gathered at the Triple Bar Ranch to celebrate Owen and Delilah's 30th anniversary. Daniel came from Phoenix with Margaret and their children. Sarah traveled from Santa Fe with her new husband, an architect she had met through her art connections. Thomas, now running the ranch with his young wife Emily, organized the whole event with enthusiastic attention to detail. The house was full of laughter and noise, children running through the rooms, adults catching up on news and telling old stories. At the dinner that evening, with 3 generations gathered around the expanded table, Daniel stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that the most important things in life are often the ones we overlook if we are not paying attention. Who showed us that love is not just a feeling but a daily choice, a commitment to really listen to each other, to value what the other person values. Who built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. We are all better people for having you as examples." Owen and Delilah looked at each other across the table, and in that moment, Owen thought about that first day in Tombstone, when he had seen a strange woman standing in the road, listening to birds. He had thought she was odd then, perhaps a bit foolish, certainly impractical. He had had no idea that she would change everything, that she would teach him to hear the world differently, to find meaning in bird songs and beauty in the small details he had always overlooked. "Thank you," he said simply, his hand finding Delilah's under the table. "For everything." The years that followed were gentler, the pace of life slowing naturally as Owen and Delilah moved into their 60s. They traveled some, visiting their children and grandchildren, taking a memorable trip to California, where they explored the coast, and Delilah added several new species to her life list of observed birds. But mostly they stayed close to home, content with the rhythms they had established over decades of marriage. Thomas and Emily took over complete ownership of the ranch when Owen turned 65, though Owen still helped out when extra hands were needed and offered advice when asked. It was strange at first, stepping back from work that had defined so much of his adult life, but Owen found unexpected freedom in retirement. He could spend whole days with Delilah now, could take long walks without worrying about getting back to check on the cattle, could simply sit on the porch and listen to the birds without feeling guilty about time wasted. Delilah, now in her mid-60s, had slowed down physically but remained as sharp mentally as ever. Her third bird guide, a comprehensive work incorporating all her years of observation and study, was published to considerable acclaim when she was 64. She continued to teach part-time at the school in Tombstone, though now she focused on special seminars about natural history rather than regular classes. And she continued to walk, sometimes with Owen, sometimes alone, always listening, always learning. On a spring morning in 1921, Owen woke to find Delilah already up, standing by the window of their bedroom, looking out at the desert landscape that had been their home for nearly 4 decades. He got out of bed and joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the same question he had asked countless times over the years. "I was listening," Delilah said. "There is a Lucy's warbler in the mesquite tree by the barn. Do you hear it? That quick, metallic trill." Owen listened, and yes, he could hear it, could identify it without prompting, a skill that still gave him quiet satisfaction even after all these years. "I hear it. I remember the first time I showed you a Lucy's warbler," Delilah said, her voice distant with memory. "It was on one of our early walks, and you thought it was a verdin at first. You were so frustrated with yourself for getting it wrong." "I wanted to impress you," Owen admitted. "I wanted you to think I was as smart and observant as you were." "You impressed me by wanting to learn," Delilah said. "Most men would have pretended they already knew everything or would have dismissed bird watching as silly women's work. But you actually listened. You tried. That meant more to me than you knowing the names of every bird in Arizona." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the morning birds, and Owen felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This was enough, more than enough. This moment, this woman, this life they had built together through years of patient attention and genuine love. The family continued to grow. Daniel and Margaret had a third child, Sarah had 2 more, and Thomas and Emily welcomed their 4th child in 1922. The house at the Triple Bar was constantly full of grandchildren during holidays and summer vacations. The noise and chaos something Owen and Delilah both secretly treasured, even when they claimed to need peace and quiet. Owen taught his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught his own children, passing on skills his father had taught him on that ranch in Texas so many years ago. Delilah taught them about birds, taking them on walks, showing them how to listen and observe, giving each grandchild a sketch she had drawn of their favorite species. The older grandchildren were beginning to have children of their own, making Owen and Delilah great-grandparents, a development that seemed both impossible and perfectly natural. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. There were over 70 people in attendance, 3 generations of O'Reillys and Barretts, plus friends and neighbors and former students of Delilah's who had made the trip to honor their beloved teacher. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, speeches and toasts that went on long into the night. But the moment Owen treasured most came the next morning, after all the guests had left and the house had been cleaned and it was just him and Delilah again, sitting on their porch in the early light, listening to the dawn chorus of birds. 50 years, Delilah said wonderingly. Half a century. It seems impossible. It seems like no time at all, Owen countered. I still remember how you looked that first day standing in the road listening to that meadowlark. I thought you were the most unusual person I had ever met. And now I know you are the most unusual person I have ever met, Owen said, echoing words he had spoken decades before. And the most remarkable and the one I would choose again, every single day if I had the chance. Delilah's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for his hand, her grip still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to stiffen her fingers. I have loved you since the day you stopped to listen to me talk about birds instead of just riding past. I will love you until the day I die. Beyond that, if such things are possible. They sat together as the sun rose higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and the birds sang around them, a symphony that Owen had learned to hear because Delilah had taught him to listen. A cactus wren called from its nest in a nearby cala, the sound sharp and insistent. A curve-billed thrasher added its melodic voice from the mesquite trees. A Gila woodpecker drummed against a saguaro, the rhythm steady and purposeful. Owen knew all these birds now, could identify them by sight and sound, could tell you their habits and habitats, and the roles they played in the desert ecosystem. But more importantly, he had learned what Delilah had been trying to teach him all along, that paying attention mattered, that the world was full of wonders if you were willing to slow down and notice them, that love was about really listening to another person, hearing not just their words but the deeper song beneath. The years passed gently after that, each day a gift they tried not to take for granted. Owen turned 75, then 76, moving more slowly but still taking daily walks with Delilah, still helping Thomas with the occasional ranch task, still reading and learning and engaging with the world. Delilah, 73, continued her bird watching, though she could no longer walk as far as she once had. She worked on a memoir, writing about her life and her love of nature, leaving a record for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who filled her days with joy. In the spring of 1936, Delilah fell ill with pneumonia. The doctors did what they could, but she was elderly and the infection was stubborn. Owen sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories of their life together. The family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house once more, but this time with worry rather than celebration. On a warm afternoon in late April, with the windows open and the sound of birds drifting in on the breeze, Delilah opened her eyes and looked at Owen with perfect clarity. "You hear them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The birds. They are so beautiful." "I hear them," Owen said, tears streaming down his face. "I hear them because you taught me how to listen." "Listen always," Delilah said. "Promise me, keep listening." "I promise," Owen said, bringing her hand to his lips. "I promise, my love." Delilah smiled, that radiant expression he had loved for over 50 years, and then she closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by family, with the song of birds in the air and Owen's hand clasped in hers. The grief was overwhelming. Owen had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare himself for it, but nothing could have truly readied him for the magnitude of the loss. Delilah had been his partner, his best friend, his teacher and student both. She had shaped who he was, had given his life meaning and direction. Without her, the world seemed diminished, the colors less vivid, the sounds less clear. But he had made her a promise, and Owen O'Reilly was a man who kept his promises. He continued to listen to the birds, taking daily walks even though his knees ached and his breath came short. He identified each call, remembering Delilah's lessons, hearing her voice in his head as he distinguished between a towhee and a thrasher, a warbler and a wren. He worked with the grandchildren who showed interest in bird watching, passing on the knowledge Delilah had given him, keeping her passion alive in the next generation. Thomas ran the ranch with skill and dedication, making improvements and expansions that kept the Triple Bar profitable even as the cattle business changed around them. Daniel retired from teaching and moved back to Arizona to be closer to family. Sarah came home from Santa Fe after her husband passed away, returning to the landscape she had painted so many times, finding comfort in the familiar desert vistas. The family rallied around Owen, making sure he was never alone for long, including him in every gathering and decision. The great-grandchildren, who had never known life without their great-grandfather, climbed into his lap and asked for stories, and Owen told them about the woman who could name every bird by its call, who had taught a rough cowboy to listen to the world differently, who had changed everything simply by standing in the middle of a road, paying attention to something beautiful. Owen lived 3 more years after Delilah's passing, and while they were not easy years, they were not empty ones either. He found purpose in preserving Delilah's legacy, in making sure her bird guides remained in print, in establishing a small scholarship fund for students interested in natural sciences. He found joy in his family, in watching his descendants thrive and grow, in knowing that the life he and Delilah had built together would continue long after both of them were gone. On a spring morning in 1939, Owen woke to the sound of a western meadowlark singing, the same clear, beautiful call that Delilah had identified on the day they first met. He got out of bed, moving slowly, and made his way to the porch where he and Delilah had spent so many happy hours. The sun was just rising, painting the desert in shades of gold, and the birds were greeting the day with their usual enthusiasm. Owen sat down in his favorite chair and closed his eyes, listening. He could identify every call, every trill and whistle and chirp. A cactus wren, a curve-billed thrasher, a Gambel's quail, a Lucy's warbler. All the birds Delilah had taught him to recognize. All the species they had observed together over more than 5 decades of shared walks and quiet mornings and gentle conversations. He felt her presence then, as clearly as if she were sitting beside him, her hand in his, her head tilted in that characteristic gesture of focused listening. He heard her voice, soft and loving, saying his name. And Owen O'Reilly smiled, still listening to the birds, and slipped peacefully away as the meadowlark sang, and the sun rose over the desert they had both loved so well. Thomas found him an hour later, sitting in his chair on the porch, a peaceful expression on his weathered face, surrounded by the sounds of the morning birds. The family gathered once more, grieving but also celebrating a life well lived, a love story that had spanned more than half a century, a legacy of attention and care and genuine partnership that would echo through the generations. They buried Owen next to Delilah in the small cemetery outside Tombstone, under a simple headstone that listed their names and dates, and a single line that Thomas had chosen. They taught us to listen. At the graveside service, Daniel spoke about his parents' love for each other and for the natural world, about how they had built a life based on paying attention to what mattered, on valuing beauty and knowledge and kindness above material success. As the family stood together under the brilliant Arizona sky, a western meadowlark landed on a nearby fence post and began to sing, its call clear and joyous and impossibly beautiful. The youngest great-grandchildren asked what kind of bird it was, and their parents answered, using the knowledge that had been passed down through the family, teaching the next generation to listen, to notice, to pay attention to the small wonders that made life worth living. The Triple Bar Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and later under his children's leadership. Delilah's bird guides remained in print and gained status as classic works of natural history. Her careful observations and beautiful illustrations appreciated by each new generation of bird enthusiasts. The scholarship fund Owen established grew and sent dozens of students to university to study biology and ecology and environmental science. But the real legacy of Owen and Delilah O'Reilly was simpler and more profound than any of these tangible achievements. They had shown their family, their community, and everyone whose lives they touched that love was about really listening to another person, about valuing what they valued, about being willing to learn and grow and see the world through new eyes. They had demonstrated that attention was a form of devotion, that noticing the small beauties of everyday life was not frivolous but essential, that the songs of birds could teach you how to live if you were only willing to listen. And in the hills and washes around Tombstone, the birds continued to sing their ancient songs, calling to each other across the desert, marking territory and attracting mates, and simply celebrating the joy of being alive. The canyon towhees trilled their distinctive calls. The cactus wrens sang sharp and insistent from their nests in the callas. The curve-billed thrashers added their melodic voices to the symphony. The western meadowlarks poured out liquid gold notes that hung in the air like visible music. And if you listened carefully, if you paid attention the way Delilah had taught Owen to pay attention all those years ago, you might have heard an echo of their love story in those bird songs, a reminder that the world was full of wonders for those who took the time to notice, that connection and understanding could transform everything, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply stop, listen, and allow yourself to be changed by what you heard.